You that, I've always kind of wondered what Buzz looks like, how he's just very small and nondescript here. Wonder no more. As far as I can tell, this is canon. In a manga that was published in Japan, you get to see Buzz up close. Feast your eyes on this! I'm kind of glad that in a moment of seriousness like that, you don't actually get to see what he looks like, because just ouch. He's stated to be a rhino beetle and not supposed to be similar to a bee in the Japanese version, so as far as I can tell, that's canon. But in the Japanese version, it's a little bit more serious. You hear this sound instead. Little did he know how influential of a photographer he would ever be. And the Japanese version just said to say cheese sandwich, and I very much like that change. His name, B.H. Perkle. It stands for bald-headed Perkle. In Japanese, it's G.H. Perkle, and that's also a bald joke when you abbreviate it. It's kind of clever that they were able to catch such a thing. The hospitals had red crosses in the Japanese version. I would say that that's probably the single most well thing known about the Japanese version. We're here to see something else. That line has never been censored out of any re-release we've ever gotten, but in Japan, it was. In the Game Boy Advance and all subsequent Japanese re-releases, the line is changed to, "We are not having a Tombstone bargain sale in this hospital." Perhaps maybe between the re-releases the offer ran out, but it still has the core meaning of the joke there, it's just changed up a little. These are based on the Blues Brothers, Jake and Elwood. They were edited outside of Japan from their original black suits, like you see in the sign there, to look a little bit like Mario and Luigi. Why? Because Nintendo's not a big fan of lawsuits. I like to sell my goodies on the street. Sure, flies line them, but in my opinion, it makes them taste even better. What would you like? That is another line that was censored in later Japanese releases. You saved Paula, be sure to come back. Oh, she's just saying the same thing again. In the Japanese version, this is a bit better explained. It is explicitly stated that Everdread rented a place to the people who kidnapped Paula. As we head in, I'd like to tell you some more little Japanese trivia. Seems like there's a lot of these things in rapid succession right now. In the Japanese version, this place was called the Grateful Dead Valley. I'm pretty certain you know why you changed it. Also, because I can't just stop throwing all this trivia at you, in the Japanese version, that's not an iron-shaped pencil statue, it's an iron-shaped statue of it's an iron statue shaped like an octopus. These guys were not wearing fuzzy nightcaps in the Japanese version, but instead were just straight up wearing sheets like their field sprites. Not only that, but had the letters HH imprinted on their foreheads. I understand why they changed it. Yes, fellow, don't go to heaven! If you are thinking that is lame 90s Nintendo of America censorship, have I got news for you. It's not. In the Japanese version, he actually says don't go to heaven. There is no go to hell line in any official localization of this game. In the Japanese version, she instead says if you hadn't come, she would have been crying. I think that with her being the attacker of the group and just being so aggressive in battle, kind of giving her that tough girl attitude that she doesn't have in the Japanese version was a good choice. I think it suits her a lot better and just kind of hammers home how she's the tough one of the group. Another good bit of trivia is that in the Japanese version, our mom manages to be even more awesome. When you call her and you're homesick for the first time, she will say, "Do you feel better after hearing your mom's sexy voice?" I heard that Paula beat up the kidnapper. She's my favorite. This kid is one of my favorite localization changes to tell people about. In the Japanese version, he didn't say that. He said, "Paula, I heard you kick the kidnapper in the balls. Way to go." According to American guides, Paula's last name is Jones. Paula Jones is her name. And her father's name is Paul Jones. On top of that, Paula is stated to be 11 years old in Japan, but at least 13 in North America. Ness was designed to be ageless. I guess this isn't really so much about Paula anymore. I guess I'm just taking things over and making them about myself. Ness it was stated to be ageless when they conceived him, but he's canonically 12 in Japan according to some writings, and he was aged up to 13 in North America. They were the 6, and they call them the 5. In the Japanese version, they are called the Tanzura brothers, no mention to their names. The Runaway 5 are so sexy. My husband definitely is in need of some help in that area. This guy's name is Mr. Poochie Fudd. In Japan, his name is just Mr. Dog Food. Either way you go, I don't think you're gonna lose out. Both versions have got pretty great names. Just play it. That was the advertising slogan for the Super Nintendo. In Japan, it had another advertising slogan there. Kids, grown-ups, and even your big sister. What would that be a slogan for? Well, this game. The Japanese version of Earthbound Mother 2 was one of the most hotly anticipated games in Japan at the time. Japan had gone through a huge video game boom during the NES era, but it was on a bit of a decline by the time this one rolled around. And this was meant to bring back a lot of interest. It was a huge, huge success in Japan, one of the most hotly anticipated games, and they saw it for being the personality-driven charm fest that it is. What about America? If you have not guessed from that, Balloon Monkey is the character's Japanese name, and according to early screenshots and that item description, it was going to be his English name for a time as well. That's just simply a leftover from when that was, well, in that stage. The worthless protoplasms, you guessed it, in Japan are called something different. What are they called, you might wonder? What do I matter anyway? And to further feed into people's bias of everything is better in Japan, this place is known as the low-budget dungeon over there. Again, I think a much better name. And we arrive at a lab, which I obligatorily have to tell you that it said labo in Japanese and had a lot more things on the roof for whatever reason. I remember that was the first time I ever heard the Japanese term labo, and I remember I thought it sounded like a clown. You know, Labo the clown. Similar to how Eagleland is a Japanese interpretation of what America must be like, this, now with Stonehenge in it, we can see that Foggyland is meant to be an interpretation of what England must be like. In Japan, it was the limbless doll. There, I said it. It's called the Skywalker in Japan. Okay, I'll try to cool it with those. It's just that these past two areas have been very, very rich with those little bits of trivia, and I like talking about them because they're very interesting. In Japan, that wasn't a protein shake. It was called the adult drink. I'll leave your imagination to it on that one. Dr. Saturn is a rare example of a character not being a named character in Japan, but them making him into a named character in the American version. Not something that you see very often in localization. Calorie stick. Ness takes it. People have told me that this is based on a snack in Japan called the Calorie Mate. I still think it sounds very weird, and like an item called the Calorie Stick is something that no one would ever purchase based on concept alone, but hey, Japan's weird. Say it with me. In Japan, Mr. Saturns were a bit different, and I think they were changed for the better in the localization. The Mr. Saturnisms, boing, zoom, and ding, those did not exist. All they said at the end of their speech was poo-poo, which is the Japanese onomatopoeia for farting. It's implied that when Mr. Saturn walk around, they make fart sounds, which is reflected in Super Smash Bros. Melee. Not only that, but their goofy font is based on children's handwriting, and with Japanese having a lot of characters that look very similar, it can be difficult to understand if you are not fluent in Japanese. I think they're still good characters no matter what version you're talking about, but I do think it's yet another reason why the English version can be viewed as superior. Other than Earthbound/Mother 2, and the prequel and sequel, Mother 1 and Mother 3, there is another game in this series developed by the folks who made this game. It is a card and dice game called Slot Brothers. It's a very, very rare game. I would say it is the rarest game in this series. But they got their own spin-off physical card game, and I've heard it's pretty fun. It's only ever been released in Japan. Big surprise with this franchise. I'm okay. Just leave me to cry into my cappuccino. Nosy! Say it with me. In Japan, that wasn't a cappuccino. I think you know what that guy is doing given his rosy red cheeks, and yeah, the censors ain't hiding it for anyone. So why even bother hiding it from people? The annoying reveler dropped a protein drink. Knowing what that is in Japan, that's pretty good. If you're having trouble finding it, remember that the Runaway Five are called the Tonzura Brothers in Japanese. That is Tonzura. Don't know why I spelled it when I could just show you with an on-screen graphic, which I've done anyway, so again, doubly, what was the point? In Japan, this man does everything. He is a celebrity, he is a voice actor, even playing the dad in My Neighbor Totoro. He currently, present day, releases books, and he has one of the leading brands of popcorn and one of the leading brands of jelly. He does everything. He's kind of just one of those omni-talented people that you are so jealous of that had been a legend in Japan for a long time. It ended in failure, and he ended up having to issue a public statement on TV that he conceded defeat by not doing it, but it is notable because he wore a Mother 2 jacket while he was on this television program to promote the release of his upcoming game, meaning that, yes, he was developing this at the same time as having a television program that was very hotly watched in Japan. I'm wanting to say that in Japan he said it was a Monopoly tournament, which is a reference to how Monotoli's name is a reference to Monopoly, and even in Japan it was spelled with a Y. If we take the text that is in the Japanese version, it is heavily implied, heck, even in this version it's heavily implied, that Poki's father hated him before this point, and Picky was the favorite child. After Pokey hit the big time somehow, his dad's opinion of him rather changed because now his son has success that he can leech off of. If it was not immediately obvious, this was a bar in the Japanese version, and the sign outside even said so. Because I'm still a kid? You didn't believe me that it was called an adult drink in Japan? Now you do. Things slipping past the censors, but I'm here to catch it. The stories that we've heard from the Tessie Watchers is slightly mistranslated and misinterpreted. In the Japanese version, it was not Tessie that emerged from the lake and then abducted one of the friends. It was that Tessie emerged, and soon after, so did a UFO, so the guy got to see 2 rare sights. In Japan, this item is just simply called Temp, so it's not quite as exciting, but it does kind of show that they might have made it so you actually needed a key to get to these upper floors, which would make a lot of sense. Its Japanese name sheds a little bit more insight into what it might have been because it's called the video drug. And if you're thinking that doesn't give me any insight, it just makes me say, what the hey is this even more than it already did, I also feel for you there. Video drugs are actually a thing in Japan, and they're not as crazy as they sound. Think of how, remember back to 15 years ago when Windows Media Player 10 was coming out, or maybe you had Winamp or something like that, and you turned on the sound visualizers for your favorite music and just kind of put it on shuffle and stared into the visualizations of your music for hours on end? That's what video drugs were. And with our farewell to Threed, we have now gone 3 whole visits without me telling you that it's called Threek in the Japanese version, not Threed. This place was just so chock full of wonderful things to talk about that there was always something I considered more important than telling you that. He is also a case of a character being named in Japan but not named in our version. Pooh's master's name is Yisu-chi. Earthbound is notable for not having additional censorship or lines of text really getting changed, unless we're talking about the Japanese version, but the American version always been the same. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I recommend that you play the re-release, is because unlike a lot of other games that get edited for content over time or things getting changed, you don't get any of that here. It is the exact same experience across all things, except in the Japanese Game Boy Advance version. Only been released over there. Because of the screen crunch, the photo man can't land on that boat because it's not on screen, so he lands over here on the land. It's a small difference that only Earthbound fans would ever really notice. No, that's disproven by certain usages of the character's name, the fact that that's not the case in the Japanese version, and also debunked by Earthbound 64. If you don't know what Earthbound 64 is, I can sum it up in the words broken dreams and low self-esteem. The default names in the Japanese version for the characters are a little bit different. You can have Ness, Jeff, and Pooh named John, George, and Paul. And then Paula would be named Yoko, and funnily, the dog is named Ringo. I think the favorite thing is also love, kind of as another reference to John Lennon. There's Beatle references everywhere, and it's great. And this thing right here has no official artwork in Japan, but it does in the North American guide, and oh god, you need to see it. Somebody was paid to Photoshop that, and it's glorious. The big pile of puke. I like it, but I don't like it as much as the Japanese man. It is the huge barfy slime. It sounds like an enemy name that Mr. Saturn himself coined. In Japan, he is called the Return of Belch. So I think maybe it was one of those lost in translation kind of things. There's a bit of trivia regarding Tenda Village that I don't know how to say this in a way that's not offensive, so I'm just going to say it as objectively as I can. Please don't take this out of context. The Tenda did not always look like this. In Japan, this game got a delay right at the very end of its development. It was actually delayed several times, but at the very end of development, it got a 2-month delay. Within this stretch of time, one of the few things that was changed was the appearance of Tendas completely. They had black skin and had monkey tails. That was localization censorship waiting to happen, and I think they knew it, so we ended up with the cute little non-controversial green guys that you know now. And personally, I think it was a positive change. They're really cute, whereas before, they just kind of had like big, wide eyes and looked kind of creepy. We don't have a lot of footage or images of what they look like, so what you've seen is all I was able to find, but yeah, that's what they were going to be. The reason why it asks for your name twice is that in the Japanese version, first time it asks you, it has you type it out in, I believe, katakana. But because not everyone's really, good at katakana, it then asks you in hiragana, which is useful for, proper Japanese. Not everyone would know how to write their name in katakana unless they've specifically looked it up, or they had a not terrible school, I guess. The Diadem of Kings is a crown that goes upon Pooh's head, or it's a handkerchief, according to the Japanese version, where I think it even has the same name, so make up your mind. There's no a or an equivalent in Japanese that changes depending on the first letter of the word. My name is Aigo Stike. Let me know if I can do anything for you. I think this guy's name is a pun in Japanese, but I don't remember exactly what it is. The name of this place is inconsistent. According to different sources, this place is known as either the Cave of the Present, the West Cave, or the Netherworld Realm. I'm sure you can guess which one of those three is the Japanese name. There was a re-release of this game in Japan only on the Game Boy Advance known as Mother 1+2. It is a compilation of this game and its prequel. Now, this is a port that has, shall we say, mixed reviews. It's not at all the version that I would recommend playing. It's not really edited for content all that much beyond what I've already told you, which is just a few minor edits. Though the problem is that, if you can believe it, there exists a version of Earthbound out there that has a bad soundtrack. Speaking of my hiney, it is time for that piece of trivia. The one that I think is the most commonly heard piece of trivia about this grand adventure. Say it with me. In Japan, Ness ain't in his PJs. He's nude. And you get to see that hiney that is protected by that earth pendant. Thankfully, you don't see him trying to wear it between the cheeks. Not named in the Japanese version, but is a named character in the English version. Dr. Saturn's understandable because he plays some sort of role and provides a service to you that's easy to remember, but fans of this game were wondering what the heck was up with this girl for years. Why this random little nobody NPC would be a named character outside of Japan when there's no mention of that anywhere else. Well, the story behind it is that the localization director of Earthbound, Marcus Lindblom, had a very tight schedule when working on this game. To make it all that it was, and seriously, good job. Your dedicated work really shows. He came into work to work on this thing every single day for the full 9 months that he had to complete it. Except one. The day that his wife gave birth to his daughter. As thanks for all he had done to make this game what it was, the team made the decision to put his newborn daughter's name in the game as a symbol of his dedication. Say it with me. In Japan, the Zexonite found inside the meteorite piece is known as Material XYZ. I think it was a positive change. The Ghost of Starman has some interesting beta stuff associated with it. It has the extremely cool name of Starman's ancestor in the beta version of Earthbound, and I kind of wish that it kept that name. It is also what it is called in Japan. The Octobots in the Japanese version, it's kind of funny to think this might be one of the last things I tell you about the Japanese version, had a bit of a running gag that is not present in our version. There have been 4 Octobots up to this point, and their names, in order, are almost octopus, looks like octopus, very octopus, and this guy is known as Actual Octopus. Ooh, it's serious. Part of an interview that Shigesato Itoi, the director and lead writer of the Japanese version of this game, did a few years ago. Well, for example, there's a gay person in Earthbound. Woof! I told you about how in Japan, if you were to send away your comments to the game, you would get a message back from Rafini the dog, as well as a postcard that was individually numbered, and no number higher than 100 is ever serviced, making it one of the rarest Earthbound collectibles when practically every Earthbound collectible is already rare. You know what this thing is in the Japanese version, and yes, after Monotoli's success ran out and Pokey left him, with nothing else to do, he turned to drinking. In Japan, it was changed to be a cheap, low-class bar, like what lowlives would kind of hang out at when their family was not really wanting to see them. In Japan, Pokey's name was Porky, and I think that's the only allusion to it in the entire English script. Canonically, in the American version, Ness is 13, but in Japan he is 12. It's one of those cases where, to appeal to kids who looked up to the older crowd, they aged up the protagonist a little bit, and Paula, I think, is 11 in Japan, but 13 in the United States, I think is what she is. She also received a slight redesign, yet for whatever reason, Pooh and Jeff didn't get redesigns at all. They still look like this in any sort of official artwork, and I never noticed it as a kid, but as an adult and having it pointed out to me, it does look really glaring that Ness and Paula are in a separate art style from the other ones in the official artwork. It's a Japan-only inferior port that no one has any reason to play nowadays. This song that plays only during the ending is the menu theme for deciding which game you want to play. They spoil it for you before you could have even possibly turned on Earthbound and started playing it. A team of people that are copywriters in Japan. They're not people that are generally known for making games outside of the programmers that they had on site and stuff like that. I'd like to thank Clyde Mandolin, who is a huge authority on the differences between the Japanese and English versions. You have him to thank for my catchphrase of the quarter, because he gave me so much material to work with when I was using his book as a resource for my research. I've read his blogs about the differences between the Japanese and English versions of games for at least 15 years now, and seeing him write a book about Earthbound I thought was amazing. In the Japanese version, it also has an inconsistent title where sometimes Mother is capitalized normally, but is sometimes Mother! Though all caps for English text is not exactly uncommon when it comes to Japanese things having English written titles. Around the Japanese release of Mother 1+2 on Game Boy Advance was an art book showcasing various dropped concepts for Earthbound. It runs outside of the text box when it's not supposed to and doesn't do that in the Japanese version. The ending theme, Smiles and Tears, does have lyrics, though only in Japan. There was a Beta Melee soundtrack released on the Japanese official website for a time. These tracks have recently surfaced online, and they're actually quite different from what we got in the finished product. In Japan, I'm guessing the change was made because this was already a successful franchise in Japan and they didn't want to be so in-your-face about, yes, this game is getting a sequel in a territory where it was not a pre-established franchise. Wise choice.